welcome back to the podcast. Today we have on a very, very special guest, Doron Keidar. He's an IDF reservist, fought in Gaza, dual citizenship, American and Israeli. He's a filmmaker, and he's an executive protection specialist. Doron, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
That's a lot to unpack. We were just talking right before we press record here. Kind of like, well, we can start with a little bit of the origin story. You have a very strong American accent for living in Israel. You got a Texas, wow, bumper, no, wow, license plate behind you. I'm getting old and brain farting a lot. You have a Texas license plate behind you in the display. So yeah, can you kind of like, hey, what's your origins? Like, how do you dual citizenship? These are all really good, interesting stories because a lot of people don't run into that all the time.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, my story is a little bit different than most Israelis in a way. You do have American Israelis. I mean, no question about it. But my origins are a little bit different in the sense that my family were not from a Jewish background. We didn't have right of return, coming to the land of Israel and all that kind of deal. What it was is that my father was a World War II vet. He grew up in a Zionist home, in a Christian Zionist home that was, it wasn't like today, I think, and more developed. They just had a very strong worldview that the Jewish people are God's chosen people and we need to protect them, which is what motivated my dad to lie about his age at the age of 15 and join the Navy. He went into the submarine units. He learned electrical engineering, did his 3 years because, and at the age of 18, when he was of age to recruit, is when the war was over. And so he fought in the Pacific, did all that. He didn't get to fight the Nazis like I think he dreamed of. But he at least was able to stand up and do his part to fight for the Jewish people, which was his main motivation to join and lie about his age and join the military. After the war, he had learned electrical engineering during his service. So he got into that in the civilian life. He started, I think, he opened the first TV company, or I don't know if you call it a company, but selling television sets in Washington, D.C., where he grew up. And then eventually got into the building and building boom of Fort Lauderdale, Miami. And so he was one of the top contractors doing that, made a name for himself. And again, it was all through a lot of his former friends from the service. And then from here to there, in the early 70s, right after the 6-Day War, my father got approached by one of his good military vet friends, who was the point man for basically hiring contractors for the U.S. negotiated peace deal between Israel and Egypt. And so he came to Israel as a contractor for the U.S. government. And that's how I ended up being born and raised in Israel. I didn't get this accent from home, I can tell you right now. Neither my mother nor my father have the accent that I have. It's kind of developed more into kind of the crowd that I hang out with, I guess, and friends and so on. And throughout the years of living and working in the U.S. in different periods. But I did speak more of an Israeli kind of American accent. And with time, I got more sounding as if I was born and bred in the States. But the irony is I was born in northern Israel with predominantly Middle Eastern Arab Jews who came from the Arab part of the Middle East. And that was actually my upbringing as far as culture and just everything that you grew up with.
How'd you end up back in Texas then, or how did that kind of connect?
So the Texas is actually through, it's through my family. My brother-in-law, he's the pastor of a church in Dallas, Texas area, in the Dallas DFW area. And we actually used to live together in New Mexico. And he actually was the one that encouraged me to come to New Mexico in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, it wasn't like any of the big cities of New Mexico, as if there are any. Again, I mean, I think I'm able to rag on New Mexico a little bit because I did spend a good 2 years in New Mexico. And, it's just such a culturally different culture than what I'm used to growing up here in Israel. Israel's kind of a fast-paced culture, at least in the city. environment where I was working professionally before going into Mexico. So yeah, getting into the heart of the United States, very southern, very Texan as well because it was right on the border. Anybody who's ever heard of Clovis, New Mexico, so there you have it. If you've ever blinked, you missed it. And so eventually, after working there and spending some time there, like I said, through my brother-in-law who got me into a security project that I'd done there, um, he ended up moving to Texas, and I just kind of moved all of my official paperwork and everything for my residency through my brother-in-law. So I have a Texas driver's license. I'm officially Texan, but I don't live in Texas. And I do give a nod to Texas because to me, Texas is kind of one of those states that really got kind of gripped me and got a hold of my things I really appreciate about America, the culture, the patriotism, the love for the state, the love for America. So all that kind of combined made me kind of fall in love with Texas, even though I don't have any actual family in Texas except for my brother-in-law.
Good. Yeah,
So
and I agree with you too. I think Texas, that's always like if you're like, hey, we need to introduce people to American culture. It's like you should send them through Texas first,
yeah,
before you send them off
yeah,
somewhere else. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the landscape, but I do love the culture.
exactly. The landscape is
Like
boring as anything
yeah, and
for good
because
parts.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like we were thinking about moving there for work probably a few years ago, and I was like, I love Minnesota. I love the weather. Even though it's cold and I love
Oh,
my
it gets
snow. I
cold
love
in
my
Minnesota.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love my seasons. But I was like, but Texas is awesome, especially as a veteran.
Yeah.
It's like it's the
Yep.
best place to live. Like I know why people like go there and they become Texan. Like I get it.
Hmm.
I just can't handle the weather. Like I'm just like it's too hot. San Antonio was just like too deserty for me. Like I've heard there's like parts of Texas that are more green. I was like, well, maybe I could probably get in line. I haven't been to Austin yet. I've heard it's a little bit easier up that way. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, I agree with you. I love the culture. It's awesome. It's unabashedly American. It's like and then they're so independent themselves. Even people that like are move there later on in life are like, Texas, we're the last stand. They like they become everything Texan, which I think is
Exactly.
great. I think it's awesome. There's a
Exactly.
lot of pride down there. So yeah. And so how did you end up then? I know what was your kind of path then going from growing up in Israel, and then you came to the U.S. and then I know you guys spend 2 years the obligated service, 2 years in the reserves, and what was that kind of like, and whatnot.
Yeah. So, like I said, we didn't have to do our military service. My brothers and I. Um, um, but then what happened was um, we did it anyways. So my younger brother was the one that actually started the military service first. Ironically, I went to the United States to go spend time with my father, who was at the end of his life. My mom had just passed away shortly before that. And so I had taken time to study. I went to Bible school in Pensacola, Florida with my wife to explore our Christian roots and to be near my father. After I was done with that, we moved back to Israel. It was the heat of the Intifada in the early 2000s, and I just couldn't stand watching my people getting bombed daily. Discotheques, cafes, buses, you name it. Good friends of mine had survived bombings. People I knew had died from bombings or terrorist attacks. So it got just to the point of like a boiling point, so to speak. And then 9/11 happened, and I was like, you know what? I'm checking out of here. I know a lot of American veterans actually that was their call sign to start their military service in the U.S. For me, my resolve was I'm going back to Israel and I'm going to do my military service in Israel actually. And that's what I chose to do rather than joining the U.S. military again because that's where I grew up. It was my home, is my home, and then what I did is I actually canceled my leave from service to where it was mandatory, and requested that they reinstitute me back into mandatory service. And then I joined about 4 years late, if I remember correctly, if I got the math right, about 4 years late. I was 22 years old. in 2003, and then I started in a combat unit called Givati, which was the southern unit that was fighting in Gaza, and we were the main Gaza unit that controlled the whole of the Gaza Strip and protected the Jewish communities at the time before the pullout from Gaza. So it was basically the peak of the combat and combat experience, and also a lot of everything that you guys learned from us and took to basically use in the 20-year war against terror in Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of guys would come through Israel. A lot of the U.S. servicemen that were going to be deployed to those arenas, they actually learned from us, mainly my unit, actually, a lot of Marines and so on, because we kind of perfected the close quarter combat and working in very complex environments like Gaza. And so a lot of that exchange came through my unit. And yeah, so I did that time there. It was pretty hectic. It was pretty insane in many ways. Like I said, it was the heat of the Second Intifada, and you ended up really getting a front row seat to our combat and what we were experiencing here in Israel.
Before we keep going with the podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for 9line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is IDF20 for 20% off 9line Apparel products. India, Delta, Foxtrot, 20. Not 10, not 15, 20%. Not 25 because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the 9line Apparel podcast for future discount codes and more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast.
And then so you went and fought, and you did that in that was the mid 2000s, correct? Like 2006,
2003, yeah, 2003
okay.
to 2006.
Okay.
And so it's three years for the guys, typically, and 2 years for the girls. Again, it's changed by a few months, but that's what it was in my time, and it seems like they're going to bring it back to that new normal, recognizing that we need to put more time in our military service after October 7th, ironically. So,
yeah, and so then that happens. What kind of, like, everything, like all that's post deployment, post combat. You eventually get into executive protection, or what's your path kind of leading out of that?
Yeah. So what led me into executive protection was my good friend. His name's Evgeny. He was one of my best friends from the unit I originally recruited with. I actually left early to do my NCO school, right? To become a commander, not an officer, but a commander in the IDF. So the way we do it is we send you to an NCO school, and then you start your first commanding position. We call for a class of soldiers. So basically about 12 guys, roughly, that you become a commander over, and then you can graduate to become a sergeant of a company of soldiers. And then you kind of switch off with the lowest ranking officer. So, any case, I was starting my training for that, and that's how I got out of the unit I originally was in, and then I ended up in founding another unit, one of the first, the original first platoon of search and rescue of the Home Front Command, and then found my way out of that because I wanted to get back to a full combat unit. But any case, so long story short is that my good friend Evgeny from the unit I first started in, he was working for the Israeli government doing security, and he knew me well. And he was like, brother, this is like perfect for you. Like, you're the guy that should be doing this. And because I was actually ignoring the letters, I was getting the letters from the Israeli government. And, back then we didn't get emails. And, and so you get like an actual, letter to your house. And I remember looking at these letters from the Israeli government, basically saying you qualify to try out for are like our Secret Service, basically, right? And I said, okay, great, cool. So, like I said, I talked to Evgeny about it. I'm like, dude, what the heck is this all about? Like, and just trying to get some feedback because I knew that he was doing some type of security. He wasn't really telling me what. Um, and so he recommended and said, like I said, this is definitely for you, bro. Like you should keep going, and just kind of coaching me along the way of the recruiting process. And from there on, the rest is history. I started, like I said, I started the whole recruitment process. Ended up working my first position for the Ministry of Education, which here in Israel, it's kind of funny. You have to clarify because when you say work at the Ministry of Education, here in Israel, we actually have not mandatory, but basically most schools have a security guard, an armed guard, and they work for a manpower company, security company, and it's like the lowest of the security totem pole, right? So when you say I work for the Ministry of Education, a lot of people think you're, and a lot of these guys are usually like an old fogey, it's like, wait, you do what? Like you do that low end security, like you secure schools. And I'm like, no, I'm not a school security guard. like the Ministry of Education, it's the second largest ministry body in Israel. And I eventually became head of security for the whole of how would you say, the whole of the Jerusalem branch, which is at the time I think it was 5 or 6 different facilities, including the facility for the minister themselves, whoever was in office at the time. And yeah, and so that's where I started my way, working for government officials, which kind of sucked because you were at the bottom of the totem pole there because they're all important people. They have important positions, head of the department of whatever, and you're just the Paul Blart here protecting our facility, and like people just look right past you like you're nobody. You know what I mean? And so it's also the whole politics of working in a government position, which kind of sucks. But again, it gave me the baseline for getting into security work. And real quickly at the beginning of my time with that company, um, I started to get requests to do executive protection because of my language skills. They're like, we need somebody who speaks English. We have a government group from whatever governmental visit, political visit, and we need somebody that's going to basically be with them and accompany them for the next week or so. And it kind of grew from there, and I kind of became the go-to guy and one of the main go-to guys actually eventually throughout many years of doing the work that I've been doing and just being really good at it because I'm not just the hard skills guy like a lot of these knuckle draggers, as you probably know and have worked with in this industry. You have a lot of hard skills, but very few people in this industry have the soft skills and the people skills. And I think that's something that was part of what created the high demand for my services because I knew how to basically relate to my personality and not just grunt like a you know like a gorilla, and go over there. Why are we doing that? Because I said so. It's the safest way, I, I'm oversimplifying it, but you know what I mean. It's
No, no, I get it totally. We were, like I said, we were combat zone executive protection, so we were, heavy guns and being like, you go over there, you go, there's
yep,
car bombs, there's,
yep,
people want to start firefights here in Afghanistan. So yeah, yeah. I know I had a few friends that worked executive protection, and yeah, it's different. Like I could never do it. I just, it's just one of those things where
yeah,
I don't know, it's just it's maybe because you just can't engage like you can in a combat zone. You know what I mean? If somebody
yeah,
approaches you, you can't tell a fan to go F off. You know what I mean? Or like,
exactly,
it's like, hey,
exactly,
back up. And I'm just like, you're not, I'll pay to get shot at. I don't want to get paid to like, beat off fans that are trying to like, get
yeah,
autographs. Like, so
exactly,
yeah, I understand. We had a few guys that did it. It's just something that was just not for them. And again, I knew a lot of guys because there's a bunch of us overseas, but and when it comes to local stuff, that's not as I don't know. Guys just aren't as interested, I guess. But
Yeah.
it's is what it is. But
Yeah.
I think my buddy, I gotta confirm with him. I think he was Taylor Swift's, and the guy, she's like 6 foot or whatever, and he's like 5'6". And there was a picture of him that was going on Google, so you could like at the one point, I'm sure there's a billion pictures of her out there, but
Yeah.
there was a point where she wasn't super mega famous yet, but she was pretty famous. It was
Yeah.
about like 2015 time frame,
Yeah.
and there's Birdie, like super short. He's a Marine Scout sniper, like
Oh yeah.
looking around, and she's like, it was really funny because everyone's like,
Jesus.
"Oh my God, it's Birdie!
Yeah.
Birdie's Taylor Swift's protection detail."
And he
But I
like
worked with
sticks
it.
out like a sore thumb, as for
Yeah,
anyone who
yeah.
knows what you're looking at, right?
Oh yeah, he's like
He's got
glasses
that,
on. And,
yeah, he's
yeah.
got
And
that
it's like
hardcore Marine
exactly.
recon,
Mhm. Yep, yep, yep. And so he's like doing that, and you're like,
Yeah.
dude, she's like three. Clearly, your
Yeah.
detail or whatever, because she's like a foot and a half taller than you are. But
Yeah.
it was pretty funny. But yeah, yeah. And I had worked with other guys too that had done that, and they're just like, yeah, it's just a different type of security, but you definitely need
Yeah.
more soft skills and
Yeah.
much more calculated, I guess you'd say, than us trigger pullers like in Afghanistan. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And the industry is very vast, right? So you do have our version of Secret Service, um, uh, but the thing is with those guys, they are more like a robot. They just work off of protocols and whatever. And really, they're the ones who control the detail, right? Or their person that they're protecting, right? They're the ones who kind of dictate where we're going, how we're maneuvering. When you work like what I've been doing for many years in the private sector, um, and you have to tone it down. You have to tone down how close you are to the personality, how much, give them more personal space, right? You have to kind of break certain protocols that you're used to in government officials, or someone like the prime minister, right? Or the defense minister, or whoever, versus, the CEO of a bank, or a Fortune 500 business, right? To, like you were pointing out, to celebrities, they need to be able to engage with their audience in some cases, and you're like that bone that kind of sticks in their throat, so to speak. And so yeah, so I end up basically working for one of the top companies in Israel that does the private sector and does all of what I just said, and then also train the guys who went through the pipeline, and I have to like retrain them to basically chillax, you know. And so yeah, I've been privileged to work with a company called BHS here in Jerusalem. That's run, or those that run the company are former Navy SEALs, and just great people. We're all on the same level. We have, again, the same emotional intelligence kind of skills, and have really created one of the top brands here in Israel that gives you that top tier security. Um, that's just been real privilege to work with these guys and do some pretty good stuff, and again, being also an industry leader too, because a lot of the industry in Israel, they actually look to us because we kind of have created a whole new standard. And in fact, we're also doing the same in breaking ground in actually doing also security in the United States, and recognizing where, you know, I don't know so much about it because that's less my field, but I know we were talking about it, how because I always assumed like security in the United States is going to be much more serious than Israel. In Israel, there's a lot of BS. There's a lot of we're famous for doing security, so people just take our word for it. So you have a lot of charlatans in this industry in Israel, right? But then you discover it's the same in the States actually, and I was like, what? I thought, but wait, no, come on now, I was like, America's more, and they're like, no, bro, we get these really, really wealthy clients that have given us some basic issues to deal with, that they have been paying security company to do the security for their home, their high end homes in places like Los Angeles. And they've had multiple break-ins, and we're like, wait, what? And not ever been caught. I'm like I looked at my, I was like, I was like, bro, come on, man. That's ridiculous. What do you mean not caught? No, nothing. I'm like, what do you mean nothing? was like, bro. And then my buddy's like, yeah. And then we looked into it, he said, and he's like, and we discovered that basically the people they were paying were the ones who were getting paid, right, to work for the crooks. And I'm just like, okay, all right. I was like, well, yeah, we definitely need to start branching out, and because that's one of the things that we perfected here in Israel. You have politicians are in Jerusalem, right? You have people that are for media or all kinds of different high end industries, and we've really learned to perfect being able to provide security for them in a place like Israel, but also avoid break-ins. And if there is a break-in, you're definitely going to catch the guy. I mean, there's no question about it because we have all the different tools that we can use to identify and track down and whatnot. And so we're just applying that too, and exporting our skills as well, which was to my surprise, actually.
Yeah, and that's the way it was. It's probably like I said, you guys are running into it. I remember we had heard about it stateside. Like, so that's why I said the overseas stuff is much different than stateside. Stateside is, you know, you can get away with rent a cop situations, and security because no one knows the difference. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's a little tougher I shouldn't say tougher overseas, but when you go overseas, like everyone gets vetted. We all go through significant amount of training. All our DD-214s get vetted, and then you get over there and then it's like, okay, who actually performs well? I mean, it's not like they're, it's not the, selection or anything where they're dropping people left and right, but
Right.
most of the people that are applying are already, ready to go, know what they have a background, especially back in our day. It was like, this was early 2010s era, late 2000s, where hey, these guys are, they just got off a combat deployment 6 months ago, and it's like you're going right back into Iraq or Afghanistan. But
And
yeah,
they
when it
know the
came to
terrain, and they've been.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like you'll
yeah, they've been
revisit. I
through it.
did that. I like revisited areas that like I knew, because I'd just been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's but the stateside stuff though, because some of my buddies work it, and they do the same like what you're saying. They're
Yeah.
like, yeah, these other security guys just drop the ball like constantly, and they're getting paid more than what we ever made overseas. And like
Exactly.
their day rates are high, and I'm like, really,
Yeah.
and I'm not doing it, but I'm like, man, that is tempting though. Like
Mhm.
I'll guard some guys that stayed out in Colorado for,
Yeah.
$750 a day for like 2 weeks. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, man,
Yeah.
like might as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, and it's yeah, but I agree with you. Yeah, that's I'm sure like I said, breaking into the industry isn't easy, but
Yeah.
there is a lot of rent a cop stuff, and and it's huge. I mean, our country's massive. We got 350 plus million people,
Yeah.
and across 50 states. So not everybody and very few people know how to do security properly,
Mhm.
especially I'm sure in the LA area. I can't imagine the regulation that you guys are probably running into if you guys have contracts out there, like
Yeah.
the rules and regulations and the, what you can and can't do to someone breaking into your property,
Exactly.
So I'm sure there's a lot of red tape around that. So how
Tons.
long you been?
It's worse than the
Yeah.
States,
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
comes to break-ins. We kind of say the joke here is if you caught a burglar in your home, go ahead and make a cup of coffee for them on their way out, because the contrary to what a lot of people have in their mythical mindset of Israel, being a gun happy country or whatever, it's quite the opposite as far as it's very lenient towards the bad guy and towards those who are breaking in. And you really, the only time you can actually engage with in a like how to say, the only time I would be able to use my weapon against a break-in is if my personal life or those around me are in life-threatening situation that I need to then therefore prove. So so yeah, I mean and again, the states is state by state and it's all
Yeah.
different as
Yeah.
well, as you
Yeah.
know.
Texas is the stand your ground or whatever.
Yeah,
Castle law.
castle law. Yeah, the
It's
castle
a
law.
wild west.
Which again, that's why I love Texas. I know that I can get I could get whatever weapons I would like to have, and if I need to use it while I'm in Texas, then the law is going to back the one defending, not the attacker. But again, you go to other states in the U.S. and You know what I mean? It's like you'd rather not be armed, and you rather not end up in an engagement where you have to defend your life, because you could be looking at some very serious legal charges, and that kind of sucks. But that is kind of like the reality for us, which I think is also why, because Israel is so dynamic and different than, again, most people kind of have in their minds. We have a lot of the British kind of rule of law that was left over from the British mandate, and then it's mixed a little bit with the Turkish law that used to be as well during the Turkish Empire, and hodgepodge of a little bit of a few other things, right? And so you have that, but then you have the threat of terrorism, you have the threat of crime, you have a lot of different layers and a lot of different complexities, and it makes doing security work or policing, for that matter, it makes you as the defender, you have to think outside the box, you have to get creative, and I think that's why my team and my company are really good at creating very good solutions for a lot of our clients, both in Israel and abroad, because we're used to dealing with nonsense, I guess is a good way to put it. And when when you find yourself in other parts of the world where the locals might find it complex and binding, we're like, yeah, oh yeah, we're used to thinking outside the box, and again, bringing really very straightforward, basic, because again, simplicity is genius, right? So a lot of times it's just real simple answers to so-called big problems, and it's just fun to work with a really good team of professionals, and guys that are really good, squared away, and it's fun. It's fun to find new answers to constant growing challenges, as this industry, of course, is always evolving, just like the threats are constantly evolving.
And so you've been doing that probably close to what, probably 10, 15 years now then, or
Yeah, close to 2 decades,
yeah.
so probably 18, 19 years, give or take.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, and I always think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so then you started getting into a little bit of filmmaking. We were talking about that, but we can kind of first go into I know you're IDF and you're still in the reserves.
Hmm.
I believe part of a special operations unit or whatnot. We could
Yeah.
talk about that, but and I know you went in and fought after October 7th, and we can kind of go over that a little bit. What was that like? During the event and the spin up, and then your role going into Gaza.
Yeah. So around 2017, I joined the Special Forces community for the first time. Up until then, I had done your normal combat service, um, equivalent to like your Marines, I guess, is a good way to put it, I guess. And so I'd been doing that for many years in my reserve duty. And then a good friend of mine that I'd done security work with was like, why aren't you in Special Forces? And I said, well, it's kind of a long story, and I gave like the short version of it, of growing up in a Christian home, and because of that, I didn't get to go to qualify for Special Forces, was kind of the issue, right? Is because of my social status at the time. Years later, I did Jewish conversion, and that's no longer an issue. But at my military recruitment service and time period, that became the issue, and it kind of broke my dreams of being in Special Forces. And so my buddy's like, "Well, you are the right mindset. You have, you're squared away. I know you as a professional in the security industry. You're one of the top guys in this industry. So, like, in other words, you're a proven dude, and I think you would fit perfectly in my reserve unit." And so I was like, "Well, what does your reserve unit do? And why would they take me without my, Special Forces background?" He says, "Well, because it's not like a direct action unit, then you don't necessarily have to be the cream of the crop per se, right? So that you're not like the A team that's going to go kick down doors and carry out very complex, top secret missions, right?" So I was like, "All right, cool. I'm interested. It's secret squirrel stuff. You can't really give me details, but let's arrange a meeting with the head commander, and hopefully he can fill me in a little bit more on what on earth this unit is and what my contribution would be." So I met with the commander, We talked, gave him my background, and he said, "Hey, you seem to be a squared away dude. Um, why don't you come for our next reserve duty? We'll be doing a few days of drills and training and whatever, and see how you fit in with the team." And so ever since then, I've been a part of the same team. And essentially, what we do is we basically perfect the mobility units for the IDF in combat. And um, basically, what we're able to do is we're able to go to the very front, to the tip of the spear of where the war fighting has happened, and to assist any of the units that are in the forefront, and then also basically help kind of like the ground forces of PJs as well. So we collaborate with the Israeli Air Force special unit, our PJs, which is called the 669 unit. And what we'll do is we essentially will get the wounded soldier to as close as they can get to an LZ, right, that you have predetermined um, with them, and basically get the soldiers as quickly as possible to getting life-saving treatments. So it's anything from I can't go into too many details, but it's anything from that to, like I said, assisting the war effort wherever that may be. And so that put us square in the middle of October 7th response, and we were one of the first units called up. That morning, we got the text in the unit text that, "Hey guys, get your butt over to base, and we're going to take part of whatever this is." At some, we had no clue what the magnitude of what was happening, but very quickly we found ourselves right in the heart of all of that. And from October 7th onwards, we spent about I forget how many months in total in the end, but a good few months. I think it's like 14, 15 months, give or take, that we did combat tours, two in Gaza, and our last one in Lebanon as well. So we got to taste a little bit of everything, so to speak, on exception of Syria, because that broke out after our last deployment, and there were other teams that were rotating and taking care of those guys, which kind of broke our hearts in a way, because it was like, man, I wanted to. The joke is, oh man, I wanted to stamp another stamp into my passport that we were in Syria as well, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
So,
And so then that spin up for you guys, I know it was pretty quick, but then
yeah,
there's kind of a hold until I believe it was like December, correct?
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
like that anticipation build up.
yeah.
What was that? I come from the military, so like I know how
Hurry
I
up and
should
wait.
you hurry up and wait, but also that
Yeah,
like we're going in, but
yeah,
when, so what was
exactly.
that like feel? Because yeah, it wasn't like hurry up, wait, we canceled the mission, whatever, it's done.
Correct,
But like
correct.
truly being like, no, this is happening, that tension build until, hey, we cross the LOD, you
Yeah.
know. What was that like for you guys, kind of being like, hey, we're going in, this is the real deal. I knew, and the buildup wasn't just like you guys just willy-nilly went in. I mean, I
Correct.
had buddies on the ground, that they asked me like, dude, let's go, like, we'll get some footage, and I'm like, they're not letting you anywhere, man, but they
Exactly.
still went, but they, and they interviewed
Yeah.
other guys in the IDF, and but they were like the irony was they left, and then like 2 days later they went into Gaza, so I thought that was kind of funny. But
Hmm.
anyways, but that buildup they said, and then I can't imagine what it was for like the IDF guys, being like,
Yeah.
hey, this is happening, you know. What was that like? And then kind of like the atmosphere surrounding that,
Hmm.
in Israel. I mean, that's a pretty significant event.
Yeah. So essentially, like I said, we spun up on the first day. And then I think it was the next morning or afternoon sometime, we finally got all our gear and everything squared away, and our orders, and in what level we're going to participate in what was happening. And then eventually we got to our first fob, which was actually a Jewish community. And we actually were staying at a newly built school for like underage. I forget the what you guys call it in English, but it's I think it's like uh, both, I think they had some preschoolers, but also like up to maybe second, third grade, something like that. So it's like really young age children, school facility. And so, all the chairs are lower, all the sinks and the toilets are lower. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it just was a very bizarre reality, right? It's like we're going into our community, into our backyard. Some of these guys, like, this is where they live. You know what I mean? And I used to live there actually with my family for about 5 years, not too far from there. We used to live in the South. Um, and in fact, in the last war that I fought in 2014, the last Gaza war, we were living in those communities, and so I knew the area very well. And some of the guys, like I said, they come from there, and that was the weird thing. It's like you're going to your own backyard. You're talking to friends, neighbors that you knew or know, and you're just like, "Hey, we're here," and clearing homes. You're clearing homes from terrorists, right? So the battle zone is your backyard, right? The battle zone is seeing burnt, charred hillexes that had been taken out, of the few that were taken out from the terrorists that invaded this community. And now you're searching for these bastards home to home to home, and really hoping you're going to find them and take some retribution for what they had done by violating your home, violating your safety and your security in the most demonic way. And so it was just a very pent up emotions, a lot of frustration, a lot of like I said, like you're violated. You know what I mean? Like just you, like you said, like where you live right now. Like imagine your suburban neighborhood, because this particular town happened to be one of those where it was more of the suburban neighborhoods. It's not the multi duplexes, but you had private homes, and these suburban neighborhoods were just devastated by terrorism. With, like I said, in the middle of the road, you have a burnt out, hillocks, bodies strewn out for miles along these southern roads where we were driving on. You had to drive around bodies, you had to drive around wreckages of, like, if you've seen and anybody's ever Googled any of the footage where they had some drone footage where they're showing you one of these highways with just cars and bodies and everything. I mean, it was just a huge shock to the system, even though most of my guys are 20 plus years veterans. Most of them come from the Special Forces community. Most of them have carried out some of the most high end missions in those years of warfare for the Israeli Defense Forces. And this is just a totally new ball game for all of us. None of us were prepared for this. None of us were prepared for the level of devastation and shock and awe that you were experiencing, while also trying to be the shock and awe to the enemy at the same time, right? So it's just a very sucky position to be in. And then, like you said, it's this whole long drawn wait of, when are we going to get the green light to go after the hostages in Gaza, right? It's like, okay, so we spent like a week or two clearing all these areas. When are we going to do the ground operations? And then finally we got the green light to do so. And so we were one of the first units that went in. Because the paratroopers and a bunch of different units that were earmarked to do the ground operations, we were in that first wave of the ground operations. And so you're actually out there in one of these open fields, because a lot of these communities are agricultural communities. So imagine you're like in a cornfield, right? But there's no corn there, because actually all the fields, conveniently, they were mostly plowed just recently. So they had just turned and rotated the crops, right? So most of the fields were actually just freshly plowed. And in those kind of fields, you have like not hundreds, but it felt like hundreds of tanks, APCs, soldiers everywhere, battalions everywhere, and you're like, like in Braveheart, you have the guys over here and the guys over there. And it's like, all right, when's it going to kick off? So you're in that rally point, right? Waiting for it to kick off, while at the same time constantly coming under attack, rocket fire going over your head, into Israel constantly, being mortared because you're so close to Gaza. And of course, the enemy figured out, of course, more or less our positions. So we start getting mortars coming in, and you're just like a sitting duck. And it's like, so until, anybody who's ever been in any big operation, and again, because my guys all have, like I said, 20 plus years of experience, and we've been in this rodeo before, we know that it takes time, and it takes a lot of time to start ground operations. But before, I'm saying, before you're starting, not starting, but before you get to that rhythm of everyday mission. All right, clear that home, next objective, you know what I'm saying? And getting that ball rolling, right? So yeah, it's tedious, it sucks. We saw the first casualties from the war get brought in through APC. The one poor young soldier, you see him being taken out in a body bag, and then his friend being taken out, limping and basically, blown to bits by one of the mortar attacks that they had done with a drone operator that dropped a mortar on them with a drone. So all that's unfolding in front of you. You know what I'm saying? And it just is one of those like really sucky moments of like, when is it going to finally get into the rhythm so we can start doing our missions already, right? And then it kickstarts, and then the ball's rolling, and then it's nonstop operating, nonstop. Basically every day you have a mission, you got something that you're doing. You're sleeping very little. We're eating also very little, because you're not going to the food hall when the food hall's open, right? Because our missions are usually in the dark, and you're operating, your days and nights are flipped around, and so you kind of like are scrounging when you get back to, feed yourself with, MREs or whatever makeshift stuff that you're doing to kind of get yourself some fuel, and then quickly get some sleep, and, and hit repeat,
Yeah. So then you guys did that. I mean, you did that for 14 months. You also do Southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
What's it, kind of, what's the feel like today? I know there's ceasefire, and I think that ceasefire is over, I believe now, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, what's the, I don't say atmospherics, but what is, it's obviously, it's internationally, it's still on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
What's that like I know you're off your tour now. What's that feeling like in Israel now? Like, hey, what's the next step, or, what's the general vibe in the country?
Yeah. Well, the general vibe is kind of mixed. So some of the country, you have protests on the streets, and I think they're the loud minority that are kind of just frustrated with the war effort, and are kind of turning their sights on Netanyahu. It's this anti-Netanyahu campaign. Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel, for those who, listeners are not familiar with. So he's the prime minister before the war started, and is the one who is ongoing, still the sitting prime minister. And so there's a lot of criticism towards him that he's restarted the ground operations to remain in power, right? Like it's just another political move that he's doing. And now that he has President Trump in his back pocket, so to speak, to support his war cause in Gaza, and the negotiations are over, which in their minds, that's somehow the path towards getting hostages back. And so I think that's the loud minority, but they're making a big hubbub. And of course, the media in Israel is a lot like the media around the world. It's very, in a way, anti-Israel and bias, which is where a lot of these political pundits can get on interviews and talk about. Even I read on Haaretz, and I'm like, it's Haaretz, but okay, cool. You can't even pronounce it, but you act like you read Israeli news. It's like, you mean one of the only English translated Israeli news outlets that's far left, that's very extremist and very anti-Israel in so many ways. And so they'll be peddling how they're also criticizing and whatever. Across the board, most Israelis, myself included, I would say, feel that the war effort is a backwind. We feel like finally we're getting what we've wanted, which is to finish this war as quickly as possible. And the only way that we can do that and achieve that is not through negotiations, because remember, and I think this is where a lot of the people on the left and mostly far left, because I don't think most lefties are like this, and also through just personal experience with friends of mine who are from the left, but it's people who are more the far left. They have this kind of rosy idea about terrorists that they're somehow like them. They're always looking for the common ground, if that makes sense. They're looking for commonality, and they think that that anything can be negotiated over, right? It's just a matter of what do you want, and we'll give it to you. Not realizing that these guys are demons. These guys don't think like humans. They don't have the same likes like you have, and the same wants and the same desires. To them, if an atom bomb were to hit the world, that would be a-okay, and no one survives. They're totally cool with that. So if you can start mentally understanding, right, in a headspace of understanding, this is who the enemy is, right? To quote Sarah Adams, right? Know thy enemy, right? So a lot of people just don't know their enemy. Even here in Israel, we don't know our enemy. We don't truly understand how they think. They think radically different than you and I do. And that's the starting point. And when you recognize that, then you realize, well, there is no negotiating with these, and that's not a catchphrase. It's become in a lot of people's minds, oh, we don't negotiate with terrorists. No, seriously, you don't negotiate with these people. There is no negotiations. The negotiation is a massive act of violence, right? That's swift, hard, and devastating. Because if you don't, and you keep it going, there is no backing up. The minute you give a little bit of breathing room for these guys, they take that as a win, and that gives them new fuel to continue the fight and the resistance against you. So we haven't been doing that. We haven't devastated them, contrary to what a lot of the world might think through watching media footage and, Gaza is completely devastated. No, it's not. I was there. Most of Gaza is not completely devastated. A lot of it is. And there's a difference. And so if it means leveling all of Gaza for these psychopaths to stop, then that's, in my opinion, that's as far as we go. And I know Tim Kennedy made this really powerful quote, even though he's very controversial now these days in the veteran community. But y'all can just take a deep breath, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you have something that you just said that is valid and a good point, and in my opinion also an original point, I never heard anyone else quote this. So to quote Tim Kennedy, which I thought was one of the best points he has made, and that really hit it home on where we're at today, both Israel and America, on the war against terror, is that he said that America has lost the will to do what it takes to win at war. And I believe that statement is exactly true for Israel as well. Israel, years ago, has gotten in the same rut of we're not willing to do what it takes to win at war, which is doing the most devastating things to the enemy. And the point that he made was, well, look what happened with Hiroshima in Japan. That act of war during war in the Second World War, that stopped our enemies in their tracks. Today, a lot of people say that's controversial. That's not cool. Geneva Code, but I'm like, bro, that is so true. That is so true, because that generation was not afraid to do what it takes to defend its citizens. And we need to restore that mindset, and to quit being a gentleman. A lot of the woke society, part of it is ironically even instilling an over gentlemanly like mindset. I'm not saying don't be a gentleman. My kids are constantly drilled about, how they behave, how they talk respectfully and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is society in the woke culture is marginalizing and talking down at masculine men, defenders, right? And calling them toxic. Well, ironically, those same people have no problem calling us when there's a war knocking on their door and that their survival is at threat and everything that they love and care for is at threat. All of a sudden, they know exactly who to call. They know to call that Tim Kennedy, who's a total psychopath. They know to call Jocko Wilkins, right? They know to call the list goes on, right? These war these war veterans, right, that are seasoned warriors. They know to call them because they know these people are lethal. These are people that breathe, sleep, eat, training to become the most lethal person alive and being hard to kill. And that's who you're going to be wanting to send to fight your wars. But at the same time, the woke society and culture is constantly downing on that, beating down on that culture, and beating down on the fathers, right? The father figures, right? The patriarchs, you know, and what Western society isn't realizing, and because we're doing similar, not at the same extent, but we also, like I said, a lot of the progressives here in Israel are also pushing a lot of this nonsense. What you're actually doing is you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're destroying the civilization that has been built on for centuries by doing that. That's the easiest way to destroy everything that you've ever fought for, that you've bled for, that you sweat for, that you've paid dearly for, is by shooting down those groups, and that's what we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like I said, we talked before we recorded this. I was like, we could talk for hours on this subject matter and everything, but we're a little more limited for time. I mean, those are great statements, and I 100% agree with you. I mean, like I said, you could break that down over multiple episodes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and people have. I mean, you're looking at the U.S. as you know, sure, as people observing the U.S., the culture, we call it the culture war here. But you've seen that play out in the decade, and you've seen the results in elections. You've seen the results in culture. You've seen the backlash and the pushes and, the forcing of things and people finally pushing back. And, I always say it's taking advantage of people who are the social contract. That's how, it's kind of the same way, when it comes to super hard leftism, is that a lot of people, there's a social contract and it takes advantage of, the loudest people in the room, the silent majority is like, hey, well, we have a social we don't want to, hey, we're being nice, like let them do their thing. But then they push and push, and now suddenly it's down your throat, and that social contract has been broken. Like you don't walk into, we experience it with friends around here, or some people that we know that come hang out. It's like they start spouting off statements. You're like, you don't even know what house we're in. Like you don't know how that's disrespectful. You don't even know. Right. You're just spouting stuff. Like you've broken social contract, thinking that you're some sort of freedom fighter, and you're just talking like an idiot. So it's you see it at that scale. I mean, imagine now, that's just in your own home, where people can be not like, look, we're Midwest, we're Minnesota nice, but it is that social. And then imagine now going to the college and then going to the next step into the next step where, I think, and that's where, again, not to get too into it here, we can shift gears, but, you see a big punch back because I think just people are just so sick of it. I mean, it would have had to be pushed to extremes in the U.S. to finally, for some people, just be like, we're sick and tired of it. We're done. Like your soccer moms and your dads that just like, you grew up in it. I grew up in it. Dude, we didn't have to worry about any of this stuff. We didn't have, you could talk with your friends about politics and geopolitics. No one was upset with each other. Now it's so polarizing and it's gone so far left that people are, not even conservatives, but just like regular liberals are sick of it. Like I know people who are just liberal and they're like, we can't handle this anymore. It's like, well, we're going to have to start putting your people in check, like it's not good. But no, I 100% agree with you. All right, so we can shift gears now into the filmmaker aspect. Right. Yeah. Speaking of Israel, you have a series that I had seen and we talked a little bit, but how did you kind of get into, say, filmmaking? I know you did a little photography and getting into the I Am Israel series and all that kind of stuff. Like, how did you kind of evolve? I know you still do executive protection, but
Yeah.
evolve into becoming a storyteller.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that kind of the seeds of that, I guess you could say, were sown back when I was a teenager, and I ended up in foster care. And the father in the family, in fact, both parents were into performing arts. The wife, very talented musician, and very much into, um, you know, more the artsy style of arts. So, you know how, like, for example, that pen is red. No, it's burgundy. No, it's, apple red. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just red. And so I had that on the one hand, right? And just really learning to appreciate, right? Because she's a female, and your foster dad is a former Marine, kind of a tough dude, and and so we're a bunch of guys too, right? Because it's myself and my younger brother, and the foster dad, and then the wife, right? So there are no girls around, and so she had to take, unfortunately, a lot of the brunt of that, like a man dominant kind of home. But her influence, of course, got into me as far as appreciating, just looking at art, appreciating it, looking at different angles, getting connected to your soft side, right? Um, and then David, he was the performing the professor of the performing arts uh, um, division of Fordham University, and was a very successful actor. Acted with people like Anthony Hopkins, and did stage acting, and so he was like a real professional actor. And when I say professional actor, because there's TV actors, and then there's stage play actors, and there's two different things for people who are not aware. There is no take another take. You screwed up your lines, and it's live, and it's in front of a huge audience, especially if it's one of the big plays, right? And so he was the guy who also found Denzel Washington, who happened to be one of his students at the time. He's the one that kind of got him on his way. And ironically, today, I just noticed recently on the news that Denzel and I forget the other actor's name right now off the top, Gyllenhaal, Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, both of them are doing a play right now, which is one of the biggest plays I think it's in New York, if I remember correctly. But in any case, I just saw that was a news thing, an item, and how Denzel was kind of driving home this concept of, what stage play is, and that is his bed and brother. How do you say it? Bread and butter. Oh, there, I totally. and so And so I just thought that was cool. When he was saying that, I kept thinking of David Davis, who had helped raise me and gave me an appreciation and respect towards acting, filmmaking, and all the different aspects around it. Because again, he was, he was the guy who would hire and fire people to create a play. You know what I mean? Like, he was like the main honcho, so to speak. And so I learned from him first photography. He wouldn't let me get into acting. He wouldn't let me get into that world. He's like, no, I left that world behind, and I don't want you pursuing that kind of thing. And so he was okay with me doing photography when I had to choose my profession, because here in Israel, when you go to high school, you kind of get to pick what profession you're interested in, and then you major in that in high school. And so I majored in photography, and that became my baseline for which then later morphed into storytelling and videography, which got translated into storytelling to talk about Israel, to talk about Israel's stories, to defend Israel, to do Israel advocacy, um, and education on the land of the Bible, and all these controversial issues that the media basically gets wrong. And I got into the medium of YouTube and doing those kind of projects, which then led into, um, being recognized and people going, "Hey, you actually are pretty good at what you do." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm self-taught," literally, So huge thanks to a lot of the online creators who have given passion and direction to a lot of people like myself, right? Because I didn't go to film school to learn to do lighting and sound and cameras and what lenses to use and depth of field, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a whole world, right? And storytelling and whatnot. And so I learned from those guys, and um, just to name drop a few, you got people like Casey Neistat, you got um, uh, what's his name now, Peter McKinnon, and just some of these people that are like not at all from my world. They're like hipster, they're cool, they're edgy, dudes, and I'm a boring military dude, outdoorsman, or you know what I mean, like into our world, which isn't. I don't think it's necessarily cool. You know what I mean? It's like, I wear Columbia gear. You know what I mean? Like, um, I don't have the right cool glasses, or you know what I'm saying, or have that pizzazz or whatever. But I was like, you know what? I'm not those guys. I'm not trying to be those guys. But watching these guys and how they're doing their craft and how I can learn from them to tell my story and to tell my story authentically and real, and not trying to imitate somebody else, trying to imitate someone who's cool and try to be cool. You're not cool, bro. Just recognize that. But what you have is knowledge. What you have is depth of understanding in the field of archaeology, Bible, history, Judeo-Christian connection and bridges that I'm able to build, because I didn't just grow up in a Christian home or a Jewish home and whatnot, but I have both those worlds kind of combined. I did the tour guide course here in Israel. Um, so just one of those guys that basically has a wealth of knowledge in a lot of these areas that I'm able to bring to my connection with people here, either boots on the ground and just storytelling and showing them insights into archaeology and history that's my interest, that then got translated into a film because of one of the directors who saw my work and saw what I was doing, and really liked the message and was like, "Hey, you should be a part of this film that I'm making." I mean, he didn't say it actually. I was the one that told him, because he was showing me a trailer. It was through a mutual friend that we met, and he showed me the first trailer to his I Am Israel film that he had just finished creating the trailer to. And I'm like, dude, that is so amazing. That's such a great film. I love the theme. I love the idea. I love the storytelling and the way, because I can see it differently than most viewers. So I can see the way he was going and the storytelling that he chose. And I was like, that's exactly what I wanted to do, but tell the story of the Temple Mount in the way you just told this story that is controversial, which is giving characters, Jewish characters, real people, but telling their story, who live in Judea, Samaria, who live in these conflict zones. But you told the story that's not showing the conflict. You just showed a person who owns a vineyard, and his passion to create Israeli wines, and is now producing world-renowned wines, and like winning the top awards in the world. And it's like, what a cool story. But if the New York Times or whatever was telling the story, it would be this hot item piece. You know what I mean? And so the way I saw how he was able to do that, that was exactly what I was searching for ever since I started my advocacy organization in 2014 called Cry for Zion, where basically I educate Christians about the importance of the Temple Mount, and that this is the place where the Holy Spirit was poured out, where Pentecost took place, where many Christians instead go to what they believe is the upper room. And I'm like, y'all, it's not in the upper room. Acts chapter 2 is actually playing out on the Temple Mount. And it's like, really? And it's like, yes. And so here I'm bringing a very controversial issue to Christians, if you like, but I'm just doing it in a very matter of fact way, showing you the script, going to the history and and whatnot. And so yeah, I told David Kern, I said I would love a movie like this that highlights what I'm doing with the Temple Mount. And he just kind of chuckled, because it's just kind of like, yeah, come on, man. He was not at all in that wavelength at the time. And then about a year later or so, he calls me up and he says, "Hey brother, I got a script for the sequel of I Am Israel, and guess what?" And I'm like, "What?" He says, "You're in it." And I just laughed and I said, "Oh, that's really funny." And I said, "Now seriously, like, do you need help with producing, or I don't know, do you want me to help with running drone, or do you want me to help with, right?" Like, I'm thinking more like practical, like, do you need help, like you need somebody to run and gun a camera for you, like, put up gear, or shot location, or what do you need? And he's like, "No, no, 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 no." He's like, the film is going to be about you and two other characters, and you're going to go on a journey from Mount Sinai, where the Holy Spirit was first poured out on the day of the giving of the Torah in Sinai, and then how God's Spirit was carried around in the ark with the ark and the Ark of the Covenant, and made its way through crossing of the Jordan into the land of Israel, the Jewish people that had taken over their inheritance, and then all those locations where the ark had rested, which essentially is also where the Spirit of God is in the story, and the narrative is moving around until it finds its final resting place up on the Temple Mount. And so that was the story that we ended up telling in the making of I Am Israel, and I had the privilege to be the executive director of that, executive producer of that, and being one of the leading roles in the film. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I mean, it's a great journey. I mean, that's super cool, and
Yeah.
that's available too, right? Correct. That everyone can go see or rent, or where's that available at, that people could take
Yeah.
a look.
Yeah. So end of next month and this is so cool. We get to release it. Again, this has been a film that we've been working on for a few years. COVID broke out in the middle of filming. And so we had to kind of push production, because last thing we wanted is to have something, that's going to be put up on a filmic, cinematic, high production, but have a bunch of people in masks. You know what I mean? So to speak. We wanted this to be timeless, and so thankfully, in a way, now when you look at it, like, the time kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and so it's kind of cool. The film will get released this May 25th, 2025, right? So 25/25, and that's going to be also turns out to be the day, Jerusalem Day, this year in Israel. So on Jerusalem Day, next month, this film will be released, and people can go to iamisraelfilm.com, and just look at, when there's a bunch of little, like, options. Just look for sequel, and then you can see that we're now able to do pre-orders. People can do a pre-order on that, and they will get it the minute it gets released. You'll get a digital download, and also, of course, a physical copy once we start producing the DVDs and everything. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
I love that as a filmmaker aspect. That's great.
yeah,
Well, I do. This was awesome. This was an awesome conversation. Yeah, you just kind of saw where you can go see your
yeah,
film that's coming out here on the 25th of May.
yeah.
Where can people find you? I know you've been on some pretty big podcasts. Where can people find you? Where can they look you up and all that kind of good stuff?
The easiest is to, and really you can find most all of these things, what I do with Cry for Zion, what I do with the film, what I'm doing with preparedness and seminars to prepare Americans for a potential October 7th attack on U.S. soil. So all of those things you can find on doronkeidar.com, which is a website where I just put all of my social links in there, and all the projects I'm working on, all in kind of a one landing page. Everybody can go and just sift through that, and they can find interviews and all the different things that I've been doing. I don't post everything on there. There's been so many interviews that I've done, and so many things I've been working with. But let's just say that most of the stuff you can find there. And yeah,
Awesome. Your socials?
my social. Exactly.
All right.
So
Sounds good.
Instagram, Facebook, all of that is on doronkeidar.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on the show, brother.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it.